the recording, please. Excellent. So as we were getting started, there is a question on the screen, and it looks like we are getting people to answer that in the chat, which is great. Just as some logistics for today's meeting, I would like to make sure that everyone's microphones remain muted for the presentation itself. Also, if you have the capability, please turn off your camera during the presentation. This allows us to make sure that we maintain bandwidth for everyone that is joining. Also, please hold questions till the end of the presentation, and to the best of possible, limit any side conversations in the chat past the introductory question. Also, we encourage you to listen to today's presentation with an open mind. Just as some logistics, depending on how your Zoom account is set up and the age that your Zoom account is, you'll find that you will have your microphone and your video across the top of your screen. Sometimes it's also found on the bottom. There also will be within your control panel the ability to have a reactions button. When you hit on the reactions button, you will find that there is a raise your hand function. As I said, questions will be held and answered in the order that they were asked at the end. We will alternate between questions that are put into the chat and those that are with the raise your hand function. And once you raise your hand, Zoom does have a feature that we're able to track the order that you raised your hand. Questions in the chat and also those with raise your hand will be moderated, and we'll be alternating between the two different platforms for questioning, just so that we can provide everyone the ability to interact and to ask questions in the format they feel most comfortable with. So my name is Charlotte Whitefield, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day today to join us for this learning session. I'm a community engagement coordinator with Oregon Water Resources Department, and with me today are several other staff from the multi-agency working group who have had the privilege to participate in this process. The format for today's learning session will be that I will provide a roughly 20 to 30-minute presentation that is an overview of the best practices in community engagement around water projects, and then we'll be opening it up to a question and answer session. So as I've said, please hold your questions until the end of the presentation, please. And there will also be someone moderating the chat throughout the presentation, and also someone who will be coordinating verbal questions, which we also very much welcome, and you'll be using your raise your hand function as I described earlier in order to participate in that format. So ORS 541551, often referred to as House Bill or HB 3293, throughout this presentation, emphasizes the importance of engaging communities, especially those disproportionately impacted or underrepresented, in decisions related to identification, scoping, design, and implementation of water projects. The 6 named agencies from HB 3293 have been working collaboratively together for several months now to develop the draft of best practices for water projects, incorporating initial community conversations, existing best practices in community engagement, and other ongoing statewide water engagement efforts. So the specific agencies that are a part of this process and that have collectively made the vision statement that you can see on your screen is Oregon Water Resources Department, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, a Department of Environmental Quality, Oregon Health Authority, and Business Oregon. These draft set of best practices that were shared with the invitation to today's learning session that will also be posted on our various agencies' websites along with this recording are meant to act as a starting place for community engagement and are intended to evolve over time based on the community's feedback and the needs of specific water projects. The agencies are committed to continuing to coordinate and to review these best practices over time, and at least once every 5 years, moving forward together. So very brief overview of the mandates from HB 3293. HB 3293 requires agencies to develop best practices for community engagement for water projects. And although the named agencies are committed to working collaboratively to create and refine these best practices for community engagement for water projects, each agency will then conduct their own rulemaking processes to recognize these best practices into their own specific agency's rules. The named agencies may also make water project support, including funding, available to develop and implement community engagement plans related to the water project. However, if support is provided to implementers of the water project, they are required to utilize best practices within their community engagement plans. So the development of subsequent community engagement plans may be done as part of this project. So as a brief timeline of the ongoing work of the multi-agency collaboration. So HB 3293 was a bipartisan bill that was introduced into the Oregon House in 2021 session. The bill received extensive support in both chambers before being signed into law by Governor Brown later that year. Due to agency capacity, the work on this bill was paused for roughly a year from 2022 to 2023. Then in early 2023, initial project work began, led by WRD intern Rose Putrin, who was instrumental in laying the foundation for this product, and we are proud to be sharing with you today. Following the initial community engagement and subsequent community engagement that we are doing today and throughout this spring and summer, the proposed draft document and the 10 best practices, the agencies will continue to refine this document into roughly late summer and early fall of 2024. Then in fall of 2024, as mentioned before, each agency will enter into its own process for rulemaking of these, referencing these best practices within their own Oregon administrative rules, as mentioned in HB 3293. And for today's purposes, I just want to highlight that in this timeline that I just described, we are in spring of 2024, and we are just kicking off our community engagement process related specifically to the document where the 10 best practices for community engagement are referenced. So within HB 3293 bill text, several key terms were defined with respect to community engagement, including for the purposes of water planning and water projects disproportionately impacted communities, as the definition that we can see here. These definitions that were in HB 3293, and which I will briefly highlight on the screen next, are meant as a guidance point and are complementary to other state definitions and processes, including those within the Environmental Justice Council. Also, through the process of developing best practices, the named agencies also defined what was community engagement for the purposes of this work and for water projects, as the process of working with groups of people who can be affiliated by place, interest, or lived experiences to address important societal issues such as water. HB 3293 also specifically defined what was and are water projects as referenced within the best practices, and specifically through the scope of those supported by the named agencies. In addition to defining what water projects may include, that you can see on the definition and on the screen here, water project support was also defined, and this was defined as planning, technical assistance, or financial support related to water projects made by the 6 named agencies within the bill. So what you can see on the screen is a draft copy of the best practices. And this document, as I've mentioned, was shared within the invitation to attend today's informational, and this document in its most updated form will also be shared on our agency's respective websites, so that those that were not able to attend or have not gained access to this document yet will have the ability to look at it and review and to provide feedback. But specifically, this document outlines 10 best practices for community engagement that may be used by local organizations and local governments in water projects. I want to note that the list of actions in this document are not inclusive, but are intended to be a list of thoughts and starting places for these water projects. This document was intended to be brief and provide clear and concise overview of the best practices and their importance to be used within community engagement. So in the next several slides, I'll be providing you an overview of these draft. And we do want to stress draft 10 best practices, as we are excited and look forward to the ability to refine these with those on this call and those within the different communities. And their importance to note that the information and context provided within this main document are for guidance purposes only. Also, not all water projects associated with the named agencies will be required to use these proposed best practices. Over the course of the next several months, each agency will be exploring how these best practices will be incorporated within their ongoing work and within the water projects that they support. Also, this draft best practices document was ordered sequentially in how we expect local organizations and local governments to use them. However, not all best practices will apply to every water project or every community. The document also includes some framing questions to help the reader orient themselves and their work around the meaning of community engagement and how best to fit best practices within implementing water projects and creating community engagement plans. This document is intended to be brief and clear, as we mentioned before, just highlighting community engagement. So we hope and encourage those that use this document moving forward to continue to explore and find ways to best meet their water project's needs and those needs of their community. Each water project is different, requiring its own set of unique actions taken by local organizations, local governments, and communities to create meaningful engagement. So next I'll be going through a brief overview of the who, why, when, where, what of community engagement, then diving into the 10 best practices. So who should be doing community engagement is important, and this document is really focused at local organizations and local governments who are working alongside impacted communities to conduct water projects. So although the size, scope, and extent of community engagement will vary, water projects should aim to meaningfully engage and collaborate with impacted communities. And meaningfully engaging and collaborating is going to be different for every project, every community, and for every purpose that this document is being used for. Next is why, which is very critical. Why to do community engagement includes increasing participation of impacted communities, including disproportionately impacted communities as defined in the bill, in conversations about water projects and decision-making processes that may impact them now and into the future, expanding understanding of the big picture, mitigating potential for conflicts from water projects, and explore creative community-driven solutions to solve shared problems. Also to improve the outcomes for Oregon communities, cultures, environment, and the economy. And lastly, but most importantly, ensure practices that maximize participation of disproportionately impacted communities and exclude past historical practices that may have marginalized or reduced participation. Water influences various processes at multiple different ways, and actions in one area it's important to consider may impact other areas or processes, such as water affordability, water quality, and water availability. So what goes into community engagement? Common ground and building a foundation of trust, respect, and supportive communication is valued. Active listening is also a key to understanding and includes both verbal and nonverbal messages being shared. This may include accommodations for visually and hearing impaired, as well as providing materials and languages commonly used by impacted communities. Next, awareness of the community and striving to ensure differences among communities are recognized and valued within water projects. Individuals should think about interactions and how water projects may physically, socially, economically, environmentally, culturally, or emotionally impact a community. Respect may be expressed in different ways depending on the community and the individual. And next is cooperative norms and working toward shared understanding of acceptable and also unacceptable ways of interacting with communities. Creating openness and responsiveness in community projects to changing community environmental questions, needs, and concerns. Water projects should strive to ensure that the benefits of the water projects extend past the broader community whenever possible. When should a water project do community engagement? Really, it's the beginning. Communities should have the opportunity to be engaged from the initial project design. The scope of a community engagement should be scaled according to the needs of the community, the environment, and the water project. Also in the middle, some water projects are larger than others and may require a longer and more involved engagement process, while other water projects are small and may require a shorter planning and implementation project. Community engagement should be done even if the water project has already been started. And most importantly, also at the end of a water project, engagement should continue throughout the project, including during evaluations and monitoring. This allows for communities to provide reflective input on the project, and it may also allow for adaptive management throughout and during the end of a project. Where to do community engagements? Small-scale engagement should occur locally and in places in communities where the water project is occurring. Large scale also is important, and some projects are larger in geographic impact than others. And in those cases, larger scale engagement for those interested and affected should occur. And also, it's important to think about the format of engagement. Not all impacted communities can meaningfully interact in every format of engagement, and it's important to consider reducing engagement barriers. This may be providing opportunities for virtual interactions for those who cannot physically attend gatherings or meetings, and also holding meetings at times outside of traditional business hours, such as nights and weekends, to ensure participation. And lastly, which I think is partially why we're all here today, is how to do community engagement. We really are encouraging the how to be the use of the best practices in community engagement. These 10 best practices should act as a resource for the water projects and how to interact with each other's and the communities regarding water. As we've mentioned multiple times already, each water project community is different, and not all best practices necessarily apply to every water project or every community in the same way. So next we'll be diving into these 10 best practices and providing you a brief overview of what is the best practice on the screen. And then also just a reminder that additional information and guidance isn't within the main document that has been shared prior to this webinar. So best practice number 1, identify impacted communities with interest engaging in the water project planning, as well as the potential relationship dynamics among the parties, including challenges for impacted communities. Although it is difficult to identify all interested parties, water projects should thoughtfully consider those who may have a connection to the water project. The identification of disproportionately impacted communities in local demographics using established systems is a critical first step to meaningfully engaging with communities. Next, define the water project purpose and goals, including what will be done to involve impacted communities. Communities may be impacted both positively and negatively by the work and the project. Negative impacts from a project purposes and goals should be mitigated as much as possible prior to starting the water project. Next, develop new or assess current decision-making frameworks to identify opportunities to enhance access to decision-making processes for impacted communities. Engagement should be designed to inform water project processes and outcomes and incorporate communities' perspectives and needs. Framework should be scaled for the water project goals and the needs of the communities. Next, invite federally recognized tribes in Oregon to participate in the water project, acknowledging their preferences and capacity for collaboration. An invitation to participate in a community engagement plan of a water project is not in lieu of any other forms of tribal consultation, outreach, or engagement. Next, co-create water project capacity opportunities that are inclusive, including disproportionately impacted communities. When possible, invest in community-based organizations to build their own capacity to engage and to maintain authentic relationships among communities and water projects. Community investment can take many forms, including compensating community members for their participation. Next, build collaborative relationships with impacted communities to ensure all parties' voices are heard in the water project. Transparency and accountability of the water project should be incorporated into all aspects of the project. Next, coordinate with the community and across water project participants to leverage resources, staff, and data. When possible, water project action should be focused on the best interest of the communities and center on communities' needs, priorities, and voices. This may include structuring our water project's budgets and timelines to account for resources associated with the engagement, and also to ensure that water project communications and information are shared in a timely, transparent manner in languages and formats commonly used and preferred by the impacted community. Water projects should clearly identify ways to optimize community engagement, considering effective use of community members' times and resources. And lastly, evaluate community engagement effectiveness before, during, and after the water project based on the the communities and the project's purposes and goals, as well as capacities, and adapt future projects as appropriate. This ensures that community feedback is integrated timely and projects are adaptively managed. Water project evaluation will take many forms depending on the project's scope of work and the level of community's impacts. And lastly, we hope that water projects strive to monitor and document the positive and negative impacts of the water project on impacted communities and their environment. Reconnecting with communities after projects are completed ensures lasting relationships and leads to an important improvement of future water projects. Monitoring should occur at the scales that are appropriate for the goals and impacts of the water project. So moving forward together. So today's presentation marks the start of an ongoing engagement process and effort around refining the draft best practices for community engagement around water projects, which is the document that we're here to share together today and that we will be working over the next several months to help refine together. So on the screen that you can see is just a short list of the many engagement opportunities that we will be providing, in addition to a public comment period that will occur in May and late June of 2024. These outreach efforts are in addition to each agency's own rulemaking processes to recognize these practices in their own department rules, and specifically for WRD, who I'm here today representing, we are expecting to actually begin our rulemaking process for this project in late summer of 2024, and we'll be conducting a separate Rules Advisory Committee set of meetings in the coming months following that. So with that, I would like to put up the screen to provide you some information on how to contact me as the project coordinator. But then I will also love to welcome and provide the opportunity for us to answer questions and to receive feedback. So with that, Lily, I might ask you to pop back on as our host. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And see if we have any raise your hands up currently.
Yeah. Christopher Hall.
Great.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Christopher. You're still on mute if you're.
It looks like, Christopher, you're having technical difficulties, but it looks as well that you put the question in the chat. And I'm wondering if that's your question in the chat, Christopher. Oh, we can hear you now.
Yeah, it's working out because it was saying the host was not letting me unmute. So it's just one of those issues. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I will want to share some information later on, but I just want to say that this presentation and this concept is excellently planned. It seems to be like the best practice of best practices. And so I'm frankly blown away, and I think this is great. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Kim, if we'd like to do a question in the chat.
Yeah, the first question in the chat is, can you put up a timeline with dates for this project?
So is that resharing the screen that I had, or would you like, are you the participant asking for some more detailed information on the timeline? And if you wrote in the chat, you are welcome to go off mute. I'm not sure who asked that.
That's me.
Okay.
Yeah, just sometimes when you see the like RAC meetings and other things, they'll have like a nice big slide with like 18 months or whatever timeline and dropped in different things. Here's public comment. Here's when we think we're going to do this and that. Those are visually always very helpful. And I wasn't able to write down all the information that you had shared with us. Thanks.
Oh yeah, so the slides that I have today, we are going to put them as a PDF and also include them with today's presentation. I'm happy to go over that again briefly. The slide that we had for kind of the next steps was actually meant to be a little bit organic so that we could adjust that based on the feedback that we received today. Ideally, what's going to be the next steps is that obviously today is our kickoff open house, sharing this idea and collaborating with you and just providing that space. Starting in roughly mid-April into the end of April, we will be doing some community roundtables, small groups of individuals coming together and really co-creating and collaborating in a little bit more depth on this. Beginning of May is going to be our anticipated public comment period. So from May 1st, for about 30 days afterwards, we're going to be sending out announcements for this document to do a public comment period where you can send in any sort of additional feedback, at which point we're going to evaluate kind of what is all the information that we received, how do we best incorporate that into the document, and if there's any sort of additional need to maybe hold another open house and things like that, just to share more information. But to your specific question, we are more than happy to share that slide and this whole presentation with you so you can have that information more. So Lily, do we have any other raise your hands in the room? Otherwise, I'll go to Kim for another chat question.
We do not.
Okay, Kim, if you would like to read another question from the chat.
We do not have any other questions in the chat at this time. Looks like one just popped in. Peggy notes, besides the slides, would you send the link to this presentation?
I'm more than happy to. So everyone that registered for this presentation today will be receiving a follow-up email with links to the recording, a PDF of the document just in case you didn't receive it, a PDF of this presentation, and also with all of our contact information for the staff team, just so that you can make sure that you feel that you have full access to reaching out to us, and we completely welcome and encourage all of your thoughts and feedback on this. Seen a couple more chats, so I'll pass it to Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. John asks, can you please summarize the background on this House bill? What prompted it and what problems does it aim to address?
So I can start. I might actually also ask Kim, who is OWRD staff and really started this project back when it was passed in 2021. So I'll have a little bit more feedback. So this bill really is meant to encourage and to help agencies who support water projects really provide a foundation for best practices and community engagement. The 6 named agencies all have different missions and support water projects in different ways. And by having a unified set of best practices, it really helps us, but really helps those that are doing water projects throughout the state have a shared understanding of how we want to engage, what are those best practices, and ways to collaborate as a state moving forward. Specifics of the bill history, I would love to pass it to Kim, and you might be able to provide us a little bit more information. I just started in April, so that's why I am not fully in depth on that.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. For those who don't know me, I'm Kim Fritz-Ogren. I manage the Planning, Collaboration, and Investment section at the Oregon Water Resources Department, working with Charlotte and others. So as Charlotte mentioned, this bill was passed in 2021. It was introduced by then Representative Reardon, and he worked with a number of agencies and others who were interested in making sure that the agencies that support water projects had the authority to provide support for community engagement as well in developing community engagement plans and implementing those community engagement plans. So this bill gives that explicit authority, and then adds that piece of, well, if that support is provided, let's make sure that the state agencies are requiring those receiving support to use the best practices in this sphere of community engagement, making sure that those state investments are following the latest and greatest that we know about how to do community engagement on water projects. We have another question in the chat from Lori. She asks, have you thought about how communities will be asked to provide their community engagement information to supporting agencies, or is that a detail to be discussed in rulemaking?
So that is a great question. So I would say we are actively considering that in multitude of ways. So we are specifically reaching out to different types of communities now to help us refine and think about the best practices and the guidance document as a whole, just so that that information and feedback really is baked into this document. There also will be another process that when each agency goes through rulemaking to really start thinking and considering that. So it's going to be an iterative process, both now and then also in that rulemaking process.
Another question from Peggy is, have you reached out to the Environmental Council and other groups? The guts of this presentation would be helpful to other agencies as they address inclusive engagement.
Yes, so that's an excellent question. So we have been in contact and coordination with the Environmental Justice Council and their staff lead at DEQ. We are hopefully still slated to be placed on their agenda for April 12th. We were originally going to be presenting to that group in February, but unfortunately due to some scheduling conflicts, we weren't able to do that. But our goal is to absolutely reach out to the multitude of other groups that have obvious and important nexuses with this process and help to share and co-collaborate and leverage each other as we go through this process.
And if I might add as well, I know that in some of the initial drafting, Charlotte and others reached out to agencies such as ODOT, who, while not related to water projects, have done a lot of work in community engagement. And then in the lead up to this conversation as well, we shared this information with the Water Corps team, which includes the 6 named agencies in this bill, as well as others who are interested in seeing where the best practices land.
And I do see a hand, so Caleb, we'll go to you next.
Can I get a sound check real quick?
Yep, you sound great.
Awesome. First of all, I want to thank everyone for all the work that has gone into this thus far, and for all the work that is yet to come. Obviously, not a small lift to make, this interagency coordination, to say the very least. And so, yeah, thank you for all the work that has gone in and all that is still to come. Having said that, I think if you went to each of these state agencies and you asked them, do you do these 10 things? All of them would say they do it already, right? All of them would say, oh, we're already just knocking it out of the park, all 10 items, right? So maybe it's just the natural skeptic in me, but I have a little bit of concern that these 10 items could become 10 boxes to check, right? And I would maybe mine's more of a comment than a question, but I would encourage you all to think about how you can sort of systemically build in ways to make it more than that, ways to make it beyond box checking, because I think we all know that just happens sometimes. And the intent of this seems to be to get beyond that. So again, thank you for all the work. Thank you for everything you're continuing to do. And I hope I have nothing but the best hopes for this.
And yeah, thank you for that comment and also for your feedback. So the document as it's currently written is intended for local organizations and local governments as they do water projects, but the bill does also call out water project supporters, which are the named agencies, as you mentioned. It is our goal that as we go through refining this document and also thinking very thoughtfully about supporting documents and information that we can help really implement these best practices. And the bill does have a commitment for us every 5 years to come, us as the named agencies, to come back and to really reflect on this and hopefully reflect on our ability to implement this. Are the best practices still really the best practices? But also our ability to maybe reflect the work within ourselves. So I do thank you for that comment. And I, as you said, I hope as we continue through this process that the agencies, as we have been and really have been leaning into this, lead by example. And through our rulemaking processes, I hope that that also is evident, is that we really are committed to this and bettering water projects across the board for our state.
Yeah, and I would, if there are any resources or suggestions on how to avoid things becoming a box checking exercise and to make sure that engagement opportunities are genuine and effective, please send those materials our way so that we can further out our library and understanding. We have a few more questions and comments in the chat. I want to acknowledge Peggy noted that the governor has the Racial Justice Council and there's DLCD as well. We've shared the information with DLCD and we'll make a note about the Racial Justice Council. Kaylin asks, can you share how an agency, for example, OWRD, would decide whether to provide water project support for community engagement?
So that is an excellent question, and I will lead into that, but I'm also going to most likely lean on Kim as well as the manager of many of our grants programs. I think a lot of that is going to be coming out in our rules making process and really thinking about how can we most thoughtfully incorporate these best practices within our agency OARs or Oregon Administrative Rules, but also really thoughtfully and purposely embed them into our granting programs, which is going to be the most obvious and first step for WRD. So I'm going to lean into Kim, and then I also am going to welcome our other state agencies after Kim to provide any thoughts if they'd like.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte, and thanks, Kaylin, for the question. So as many of you all know, in working with an agency, a first step is, does the agency have the authority to do a particular thing? And so this bill gave us the authority to do so. The next piece is, do we have the resources to take on the work? And I want to acknowledge the work of many who are on this call and others at the legislature that have been investing and providing resources to agency to take on this work. So those are our two key pieces, and then it's reflecting on how do we implement those. So for example, at WRD right now, we are looking at our existing grant programs, at our staff resources to see how we might provide that support. And that will determine whether and when, and we can get that sequencing done out. But currently, we're looking to see, okay, where's the good fit in our funding opportunities? What money are in those pots that we could leverage to provide this support?
Okay. And I'm going to pause to see if there's any other additional thoughts from our agency partners. I'm not seeing anyone coming off. Oh, Brian, would you like to add in?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that OWEB does provide grants for engagement or also capacity and open solicitation restoration projects and monitoring. And all of those could support water project development, implementation, and monitoring. And those projects are would go through a competitive grant review with a technical review team of state, federal, and tribal agencies that would provide input and recommendations on whether that should get funded.
Great, thank you. And Kristen.
Hi, Kristen Larson, Water Funding Coordinator with Business Oregon. And I think Kim laid out sort of the decision points that an agency would have to look at. And in addition to that, one of the first places we're looking is at our Safe Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, which is Oregon's program implementing the drinking water state revolving fund that comes from EPA. So in addition to getting the authority through this bill, there's also the funding stream that we might use to provide some of these resources to implement community engagement and community engagement planning. And does that funding source in turn allow, and in what way and to what degree? So sort of layers of that decision tree, but yeah, and the capacity to do it, and where's the good fit for that in our programs.
Great. And Chris.
Hi, Chris Marco with Oregon DEQ's Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. And I'll just say we're exploring ways that our agency could support community engagement planning. There's no final, it's early in this process. And, in terms of what's required in the bill with the rulemaking, that is focused, our understanding is on acknowledging best practices. And so how that gets implemented will be more of programmatic discussion. And, in terms of resources, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund is one program within DEQ. We're talking about how this bill might relate to other areas of DEQ. Obviously, we're a funding resource. And we can provide support. What that looks like in terms of making it meaningful is something we need to look at more. We need to look at the need for it. We don't want to make it burdensome. And we feel good about the best practices that have been developed collaboratively here and drafted. So hopefully that helps add some perspective. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
We have
Same.
some more feedback in the chat. Some of it begins to touch a little bit on what Chris was just saying. Lori notes some feedback to think about as you develop how local organizations will be required to provide community engagement plans / information. Consider the capacity of very small organizations whose staff wear too many hats.
Exactly. And I feel that might be just more feedback, as you mentioned, but I do want to say on this call is that we're trying to be extremely mindful that meaningfully engaging means in both directions, so that those that are doing the water projects, we are acknowledging that each project's different. The size and the scale of the work is going to be different, but also the needs of the project and the communities will be different. So our goal is that these best practices act as guidance in a framework, and that every project is very thoughtful about how they use them within the scope, scales, and needs of those projects.
Thanks, Charlotte. Molly has a question. How were the agencies decided upon? I believe in reference to which of the agencies named in the bill. She says, I fear without the Department of Agriculture or collaboration from the Oregon State Board of Agriculture and/or Oregon Farm Bureau, just from a community engagement standpoint, that it will have a hard time engaging the agricultural communities in Oregon to collaborate and participate in a meaningful way.
Well, so thank you for that thought and the feedback. I would say that the agencies named in the bill were set forth by the bill, but I would say that we are actively trying to collaborate past just the named agencies, sharing this document, as Kim mentioned, with the Water Corps team. Also, WRD does have a lot of connections within the agricultural community. So when we are thinking about our Rules Advisory Committee and different outreach points, we are actively engaging irrigation communities and farming communities through the lenses and spheres that we are operating in. I will pause and see if Kim has any other insight for when this bill passed, why we were identified. My thoughts were they were trying to get a concise group that touched a large mission.
Yes, I could not say with any certainty how the representatives selected the agencies that are listed on the bill. And I don't believe the legislative record had any information on that. But Molly, if it is of interest, we can check and see if there was contemplation about including ODA and at all. And if so, why? Maybe that didn't happen. We are caught up on questions in the chat if others want to raise their hand or pop some other questions or feedback into the chat.
So not seeing anything. I would just like to once again thank all of you for coming on to today's call. I'm actually going to go back to share my screen just to put my contact information back up so that you'll be able to see that and to capture that on the way out of the meeting today. Once again, we just want to welcome you to please reach out to us. This recording and this presentation and the document will be shared with everyone that was on today's call, in addition to anyone that registered for today's meeting. These information and materials will also be posted on our website so that you can access and share them past there. And I just welcome you to please keep a lookout for different ways you receive your information from GovDelivery and the different agencies. We're really excited. Information on this open house went out very widely, and we will continue to be using those platforms and others to share information. I'm going to pause for a second to see if I see any other hands.
I'll note that somebody who was engaged in legislative work indicated that the screening for who would be in the House bill is likely tied to the agencies who actually do water projects.
Great, thank you. So with that, seeing nothing else, I am going to share my screen one last time just so you can have my contact information. So please feel free to reach out to me, to anyone of the other agencies on today's call. We will share their contact information with you all, just if you have any specific questions that are agency related. But I just once again, thank you for your time and your participation. And I was very excited to see 108 people on today's call today. So with that, please enjoy your afternoon and some sunshine.